habits, rituals, strategies for workplace productivity. And look, not everyone is obsessed with that, but I absolutely bet you are. And I am too. I've got a friend, Kieran, who swears by the Pomodoro method, where you set a period of time that you have to work for and then you get a little reward of a little break at the end. Everyone's got those workplace productivity hacks and tips, things that motivate you to work more. Hello, I'm Kellie Riordan, and today it's time for something a little different on Curveball. Usually, of course, you hear from one amazing leader about the challenges they've faced, how they've strategized, the times they thought they wouldn't make it in business. And if you haven't listened to all our usual episodes yet, please go back and do that first. Maybe start with the incredible Kate Morris, who's done such amazing things to build Adore Beauty, and she wants to dream bigger and for other business owners to dream bigger as well. So that's a good one for a bit of inspiration if you're needing it.
I was worried to fail because nobody likes to fail. But also, my mum, she said, look, whatever happens, you're still you and you'll be fine. The worst thing that can happen is that, you give it another year and it doesn't work, and then you chuck it in and you can go and get a job. What have you lost? What hurt would it be to give it another year?
But if you're up to date with your usual Curveball listening, you're going to love what I have for you today. One of my favourite podcasts is called How I Work, where Amantha Imber talks to world-leading innovators about their work habits, rituals, their strategies for structuring their day. Every episode contains these practical tips and insights, and I've used a lot of those hacks myself. And today, well, Amantha and I are teaming up. It's the crossover episode of Curveball and How I Work that you never knew you wanted so much. Hey Amantha, I have been such a big fan of How I Work for a long time because I'm so interested in productivity hacks because I'm just so busy. Anytime that I can shortcut something or automate it, I'm all in. So tell me, what was the original idea behind the show and how you came to podcasting?
So for me, I'd been procrastinating about starting a podcast, I reckon, for 2 years. And then I'm like, just do it. Like record, 6, 8 episodes and see what happens. And the idea that I wanted to explore is that I was always really fascinated by all these successful people in the world that had achieved so much with their lives, yet we've all got the same amount of hours in the day. And I wanted to know, are they using their time differently to the rest of us? Surely they're doing something differently. And so at the time of having this idea and thinking, okay, I'm going to bite the bullet, I'm going to start a podcast, I was also attending TED 2018 in Vancouver, which gave me amazing access to some of my first guests like Adam Grant and Amanda Palmer and Matt Mullenweg, the co-founder of WordPress and Automatic. So that's how it all came about.
Wow. Which is crazy to think you even went to TED because it's like so expensive and you're in the room with like the minds in the country. So
I know.
How did you convince them to go on what then was your little show on the other side of the world?
With 0 downloads. I have no idea. I don't. I think I pitched it, and I feel like the TED the TED proper crowd is very inclusive and very generous because you have to apply to get in. It's basically a curated group of 2,000 people, which sounds quite big, but I think they're quite picky on who they accept. And so I feel that because I was accepted into that, they probably were like, okay, well, TED has a spirit of generosity, so I'll say yes. I think that's what was going on, but really I think I was also very lucky.
You have an incredible ability to transpose some of their thinking, all these great minds from around the world into practical, real tips that you can apply though. And that's because your background is, of course, in workplaces. Can you tell me about your background?
So I trained as an organisational psychologist. So I did my doctorate in that. I graduated 20 years ago, which I feel that makes me really old. But I was always just fascinated by the idea of how can we help people feel happier and more purposeful and ultimately do better work that we're more proud of, given that this is where we spend a third of our waking lives. So for me, it's like, what better way to use my psychology skills than to help people with this thing that occupies so much of their life?
I want to talk about one of your most recent episodes, which I just loved because it was a woman who's brought her skills in comedy writing and this sense of sort of levity and humour that we can bring into the workplace and into the boardroom. Tell me about that episode.
So that was with Naomi Bagdonis, and she lectures at Stanford Business School in humour. So she teaches
I can't believe that that's a thing, right?
I know. That is totally a thing. And
Does she have it on her business card?
I don't
Lecturer,
know.
comma, humour.
I know. Surely she should or would. And so I came across Naomi because I read her book, Humour Seriously, which she co-wrote with another person that she teaches with at Stanford. And it was fascinating. So I've always been very interested in comedy. Like, I attend a lot of comedy. I love April in Melbourne because it's comedy festival time. And I'm always just really interested to understand how do you be funnier? How do you construct a joke? How do you bring more humor and levity into work? Because I don't feel like there's enough of it. And it's something that I really try to do at Inventium. So I've picked an excerpt from my interview with Naomi about an example of how she brought humor into something very serious, which is writing the book proposal for Humour Seriously.
When it was time to write a proposal, again, something that could seem really intimidating, we started a Google Doc and we titled it A Really Shitty Proposal. And so every time we opened this doc, it would say a really shitty proposal. And it'd be like, I'd text her at 6 a.m. and be like, hey, I'm in the shitty proposal right now. I'll see you there later today. And it's so funny. That stuck. So we ended up kind of mistakenly turning it in at one point to a publisher that way. And they loved it so much that we ended up pitching it to all the publishers as a really shitty proposal. Humour Seriously, a really shitty proposal. And so we knew at the beginning that there were parts of this that were going to be really hard and were going to be a slog. And so it was our way of creating these hacks and reminders to ourselves to have a sense of levity and really to practice what we preach as we're doing it.
So, Kellie, you have been hosting Curveball for the last few months, and I've loved hearing some of the stories that you have uncovered. You're so great at building like essentially what is a leadership and business podcast into these fascinating stories, which I feel is such an art, but also not surprising given your background heading up podcasts at the ABC. So what have you loved most about creating Curveball?
I think it was a couple of things for me because my background is as a producer and a content creator, and also I've been behind the microphone way back when I was a junior. And then, as tends to happen in your career, you end up kind of moving up the chain, and I did that at the ABC and kind of became a leader in the organisation. And so I was running content teams in both radio and podcasting. And so I was away from the microphone. And I just had this itch to get back to something that I really love, which is just talking to people. Like we have this amazing ability, you and I, and this amazing opportunity to speak to some of the top minds in the world. And so I just find it great to just get inside their mind and kind of peek around and see what's going on inside their brain. And I was a little bit like you. I'm fascinated by how really great minds and great leaders and great people in the workplace come to kind of be how they are, and what kind of forms their background and drives them, what makes them tick. And I love poking around those stories. So the idea behind Curveball was both, I was starting a new business, so I wanted people to kind of help me on the journey of starting a small business for the first time. But it also was about poking around in other people's business, which is what you do when you're a journalist or a podcast host. So it's been a real privilege.
Yeah, it's so funny. Like the guests that you and I have had on our respective shows, it's like normally in real life, they wouldn't give us an hour of their time, but because we have a podcast that people listen to, you get to spend an hour with these amazing people, which is one of the things I think that I love most about podcasting. Do you relate to that?
Absolutely. And that's the great gift and the great joy. And it's such a privilege. And I think spending time with these people to understand their process, like I'm completely obsessed with process. Like I think we as a society are obsessed with the outcome or the success or the thing that happens at the end of the story. But I really want to know what happened along the way. And one of the things with Curveball is, of course, we talk about the successful leaders and the wonderful things they've done. But the whole concept of the show is a curveball, right? That something can be thrown at you at some point and you don't know how to deal with it, or it's come out of nowhere, it's never happened before, like a global pandemic. And so I'm interested in how people cope with that, I think. One of the people I loved chatting to was Carolyn Creswell, and she's the owner of Carmen's in Australia that does the muesli bars and the muesli and bliss balls and all those sorts of things. And she's so authentic. She's so real. She started that muesli company with, $2,000 in her pocket when she was about 21, and she's built it into this incredible empire. But I think what I loved most about talking to her was the idea that, nothing is ever finished, and she very much views it as a journey. And I thought this that she said on the podcast was really interesting about success versus failure and how closely related they actually are.
A boat in the harbour is safe, but eventually the bottom will rot out. And if you don't push yourself out there, if you are not having any failures, you are not taking enough risks.
It's so good, isn't it? Because she just encourages you to be bold and to think differently and to go, you know what, you're going to learn a lot when you take a risk and even when you fail.
I know. She's very inspiring. I've known her for a few years now, and I had her on How I Work, I want to say maybe like 18 months ago or something. And she's just so impressive. And I feel like she just leads with a lot of heart as well. Like she just cares so much.
Anyone that has a yoga studio or a meditation space in their workplace is all right by me.
Yes, definitely.
She's really good. Look, another person I think who I heard on your show recently that has some similar traits to Carolyn in that he's very authentic and he's trying to do good in the world is Simon Griffiths from Who Gives a Crap. Tell me about the interview you did with him.
Yeah, so that was really interesting. They had such an insane year in 2020 where at one stage they had received so many orders for toilet paper. They had 500,000 people on their waiting list. And I'd love to play just a grab from that in terms of, how Simon and his team approached that problem, and particularly as a remote first organisation, which they've been operating as for several years.
Our team at the start of that whole process realized that that was our moment to shine. As a remote first company that sells toilet paper online, it was like we'd been training for 2020 for the 5 or 6 years prior. And so everyone got their heads down and worked really hard, knowing that if we got this right and we solved this problem in the right way, it would ultimately end up in this huge donation at the end of the financial year, which for us is the 30th of June. And so when we got to the end of that mailing list in June and then made a $5 million donation at the end of June, it was the icing on the cake of all of this incredible work that had come before that.
He's got a real sense of purpose about what he does.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, it's hard when you're a leader, like trying to sort of balance things where you're steering a ship when, things are going crazy and like the seas are wild, but then also trying to, remain composed and reassure people that things are going to be okay. And I know that you had a few months ago the ex-CEO of Virgin, Paul Scurra, on your show.
Yeah, he was incredible. The first conversation I had with him for the podcast, he'd been through so much already because COVID had happened. He had to ground all his flights. International travel was gone. Domestic travel was gone at that point as well. And they ended up in administration. He worked through that. They found a new buyer. And then at the 11th hour, he got rolled out of his job. And to add kind of insult to injury, he was replaced by a Qantas executive. So it was really quite brutal. But he was generous enough to come back and speak to me even about that and what that is like. And I think one of the things, again, that stuck in my mind about this interview is how steely focused Paul Scurrah is and how much he uses that kind of mindset or that positive approach even when there's chaos.
First and foremost, I think it's important to look like you are calm and in control, at least of the message. But at that point in time, it's not lost on me that there's 10,500 people who are looking to me to lead through whatever it takes to rescue us. So I think it's important to keep everyone as calm as you possibly can. But at the same time, you need to keep them as informed as you possibly can as well. And it's not a time for being cute with your words or being a little bit less than transparent.
I think that idea of keeping people informed on what's really going on, but having the right tone around it is so crucial. So how do people find the How I Work podcast?
Well, search for How I Work wherever you listen to your podcast, and I'm sure we will link to it in the show notes as well.
And similarly, you can find Curveball by searching for it, or you can go to curveballshow.com. Thank you for all the great episodes of How I Work.
And you too, Kellie, for all the great episodes of Curveball.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.